everyone, it's Maddie.
And me, and today we're going to be getting to know our characters for Project Imposters.
We printed out this sheet of 50 questions to answer about your characters before you start to write them, and this is the first time we've done something this in-depth before.
We found the sheet from Bethany Atazada's page, and another method we're using is Sarah Cannon from Heart Breathing's Get to Know Your Characters thing from her How to Plot a Novel series. The two most important things we got from Sarah's worksheet is what is their deepest desire and what do they truly need even if they don't realise it yet. These two things are often juxtaposing, and we treat one as what the character knows and the other one as the character's secret.
We chose to do this project because with our fantasy novel, we took plotting and character development really seriously, but with our contemporary before that, which is obviously Project Imposters, we did little to no build work for it.
Throughout the drafting process, I was constantly saying to Maddie, I don't feel like I know my POV character, she seems really changeable, and the side characters in her orbit were just bouncing off whatever she needed them to be in the moment too, so I didn't feel like anyone was consistent.
I felt like with my character he was too consistent throughout the whole book and didn't actually have any room to grow because I was starting him off at the wrong point. So hopefully with this we'll be able to learn some new things that we haven't known about them before and feel like we really know them before we start to write them.
So the first section of the questions is the big picture, and these are the ones that we know for sure.
From big picture, definitely the most important things were occupation, because we suddenly had to question whether our female character was going to have a part-time job anymore. She did in the original draft, but in that she was like 2 years older than we've now had to age her down, and that meant that when I was thinking about social class and her money situation, I really had to go through the reasons. So I think she will need a part-time job, and that's something we're going to have to think about a little bit later on. I ended up writing like a pretty sizable paragraph on social class because I realised that I hadn't actually written down in any sense what my character and her parents' relationship with money was like. One of the huge conflicts in the novel is her parents' agreement or disagreement rather with what she chooses to do with her life, and that is really tied up into money, so it was huge to actually be able to write it down and get it clear in my head.
And also in figuring out what Bee's character was like, Mayan almost has to be a direct contrast to that because we want them to have things that separate them and things that they can talk about. They don't come from completely different worlds because in the end they do want to pursue the same thing, but just the attitudes that their parents have are completely different, and that's definitely going to impact some things later on too. Next we're moving on into the personality category, and the first thing we have to figure out is what their Myers-Briggs configuration is. It's the 4-letter one that has 16 personality types, and there's also a bunch of comparisons too to other literary characters, so you can have a look and see if you can get any inspiration from that as well. So we're about to complete that. It's not something I've ever done with a character before, so this should be interesting. Because we found a website that just talks about the 16 types and keywords that you could use to describe them, we thought we'd try and do it for all 6 of our main characters, and we've made a brilliant revelation about one of our characters. So we're just reading a paragraph about the personality type we decided, which was ENFJ, and these were just with words, and now they've used sentences to describe it, and they're so accurate. My character is labelled the council of the 16 personalities. I think with this kind of thing, it's important to take everything that they say about the personality with a pinch of salt, because some of it is chiming true and then others aren't really gelling. As long as we find something that's quite close to them, then I'm happy. It doesn't have to be a 100% fit. An obvious distinction with our characters is that one is extroverted and one is introverted, so that should make it easier to find your character on the chart.
A huge part of my character and the relationship with her best friend is that they are very codependent, and that's something that you don't really see in these introverted characters.
Yeah.
So a lot of the adjectives for these characters are like independent and self-motivated, which I don't think speaks to either of the two characters, so I'm only ever, I guess, going to be getting like half of the introverted side of things.
So we've managed to come up with all of the Myers-Briggs initials for the characters, and it's really interesting to see the similarities and differences between them as we realise that our two main characters are just the introverted and extroverted versions of each other. So now orange is highlighting our main characters and blue is highlighting the siblings. Again, there's not much difference between them, they're twins, but there's something fundamentally different about how they act around other people.
I guess here are relationships. These two are friends.
Yeah, best friends. Although it's interesting to see that there's quite a lot of differences between them.
This has actually been surprisingly helpful because I've always known that our characters are different, but actually getting to understand why, like the root of their differences, has been really eye-opening.
These two are also a relationship. It's like the same swaps for these. Like, they're basically the same, but just like the introverted and the extroverted versions.
And we've also understood a connection between two characters because they have the same personality type, and that's why they gel so well.
So we've also written down the commonalities, so the people that share the most and the people that share the least.
So it's really interesting because because R and M are sort of like enemies in the book, not really, but they're very conflicting, so that makes sense. M and A and D and O are the like best friends of our main character, so it's really interesting that they have a character that's on like each side of their personality who's very different. So whenever they're going to have conversations, you'll have to think like who is the most appropriate to be having this one with. So they have someone to speak to different sides of their own personality, and that means they complement each other as a group as well, because it means they've got lots of different opinions.
Before we started filming this video, I always thought that doing the Myers-Briggs test wasn't actually that helpful. I thought it was just a way to convince yourself that you knew the character without really understanding them. And yet, now that we're doing it second, I feel like it's just brought a whole nother layer to the characters and reasserted some of the ideas we already had, but given them an actual explanation. So I'm really impressed by this.
Their personalities are making sense to like the functions they had in the novel already. That just makes me feel really secure in the decisions that we've made, and especially with the changes we've made to the characters in this round as well. It makes me think that the relationships we're going to build in this novel are going to be much stronger than they were before.
We're on the 16 personalities websites to get their strengths and weaknesses because they're just really accurately summed up, and the ones for B's character are really on the nose, so thank goodness, I take it back, this website is helpful.
We've done a lot of the deeper questions and the background in our Scrivener document, so it's mostly these extra questions that we want to focus on now. So we're just going to highlight the ones that we think are going to get the most out of it for our characters. What makes them relatable, which I think is really interesting because it's more of a question about how you want to make the reader feel. So we'll highlight that one. Who/what gets under their skin.
It's like an interesting way to learn how the characters have relationships with each other. I like that question a lot.
But I think like who/what could break them is almost
equally important.
I feel like that's one we could answer very easily as well.
When someone first meets them, what do they think is an interesting question.
Hobbies we don't really need because we already know that.
How do they feel about themselves is a very like interesting question too. You could learn a lot about a character.
It's mostly these three that we need to do.
So our final thoughts on doing character development is that it was way more helpful than I ever thought it would be. As soon as we highlighted all of the things that we wanted to work on next, we went straight back into our Scrivener file and padded out the document to make sure that the characters had everything that we thought we needed to know. But that's not to say that we won't continue to learn things about them as we write them a second time. Because they feel quite different to how we wrote them in the first draft, there's going to be things that we can only really discover as we go. So thank you everyone so much for watching. Don't forget that we post writing videos on this channel every Thursday. And let us know in the comments what are your favourite ways to get to know your characters. We'll see you next time.